Well, hello, and thanks so much for joining today's QE Babble. Today, we're going to talk about how to spot a quality engineer. So, if you identify as a quality engineer yourself, do you share any similar traits with others at your company who do a similar role? And if so, what are these? With the rapid advancement in technology, the space for quality engineers to operate in is constantly evolving and it's always under pressure. Agile really changed the game for testers, and automation did too. And now we've got AI in our midst, so things are always changing. But what's the constant? What are the key character traits that make up a good quality engineer? And does the industry have any kind of fit for purpose method of assessing all of these required skills and experiences? Does it even need one? So we've assembled a group of hugely experienced quality leaders to share their views on these fundamental questions, and we really appreciate their time today, giving us their views. So during the session, we'll try and cover what are the key components to being an effective quality engineer. We're going to try and focus on personality and character traits rather than technical skills, and then we'll look at how these can be accurately assessed, and then we'll also look at if the industry is lacking some kind of university recognized accreditation or certification to give testers a pathway in their careers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to today's panel. So a big welcome to Paul, Brian and Seema. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for inviting.
So Paul, if I come to you first, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself briefly and telling us why you think this is an interesting topic to cover.
Well, I've been around a long time. Got involved in IT in the 90s and spent 10 years or so as a developer, as a techie. And I still am a techie at heart, but got into testing nearly 30 years ago now. And been a consultant, test manager, written books, done conferences, all that kind of good stuff. I'm still enjoying it, still part of the scene, I'm happy to say. Why quality engineering and understanding that it's important. I'll mention a wrinkle I've got with the word quality, but apart from that, the whole notion of quality engineering, test engineering is critical as always. And we've talked about, let's say, professionalism and these topics about what makes a good quality test engineer. We've been talking about this forever. And we still have debate about it. So it's not decided. So I think it's still important to have these debates and try and maybe make some progress. I think that's probably where I'm coming from.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much. Seema, welcome to you as well.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for inviting me to this panel and looking forward to the discussion here as well. Just a quick introduction to myself. I'm Seema Prabhu. I'm the Director of Quality in the Hardware Business Unit at Huddle. And I've been in software testing 18 odd years. And over the last many years, I've been a hiring manager. And I think while hiring for quality engineers, this has been a huge question always. And at each role, each organization that I am, that question changes. Who are we looking for? What kind of a role are we looking for? What kind of people are we looking for? Who makes the best fit? These kind of questions, we're constantly, every year, it changes with technology, with methodology, everything changes. So the role also has been evolving. And I thought this was a great conversation to have. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Yeah, hopefully it'll be an interesting debate. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. I've been in testing for over 35 years, and during that time I've done just about everything that you can possibly do within the testing role, starting off with reviewing assembler code about 35 years ago, right through to setting up test centers of excellence and being director of a practice and everything in between. One of the main characteristics that I'm looking for is the right attitude, the right mindset for the testers. And as we're getting more technical, I think we need to be thinking also in terms of the right mix of skills for those people as well. So it's not just, to use the horrible term, manual testers. I think that's quite inaccurate. And just test automators. There's a much more interesting outcome to be had from mixing those skills and from having the appropriate technical soft skills. Again, not a good term, soft skills, because they're actually the more difficult skills to acquire. And I feel that it's important that we're looking in that direction, because a lot of people that talk the talk but can't necessarily walk the walk when it actually comes to getting on the ground and delivering. So I think it is important for us to examine, what does it actually mean to be a quality engineer or a quality assurance tester, or whatever terminology you want to use. But I think we need to consider how we actually approach that in all aspects: technical, non-technical, mindset, the works.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, it's the first question is a broad one. So we've said what components are needed to be an effective quality engineer. When certainly in the job that I do with looking at recruiting and hiring people, it's quite easy to get bogged down in skills. And clearly, for any job, there's generally a minimum set of expectation on what skills someone might already have before they come into the role. But even if we just put those to one side for a second, it would be good to try and focus on what Brian particularly mentioned there around things like attitude, mindset, sort of character, personality traits. What makes a good quality engineer from that perspective? Sorry, Paul, if I could come to you first on that point.
There's probably, I'm sure we'll get around to doing quite a few of these. There's probably 10 or 15, I don't know how many, but a large number. But one that strikes me always is being a quick learner. Because when you're parachuted into a new project, whether you're coming from outside a company or you're part of a team that's been working on a big application or a big architecture for donkey's years, everything that hits you is new. So you've got to hit the ground running and learn quickly and move quickly to get to the point that you can make progress in what you're trying to achieve. So to me, a quick learner is almost the most important thing. And even if you don't know enough testing, you still need to learn how to test. So there's no end to your continuous learning in your life, I don't think, as a tester or quality engineer, I should say.
Okay, thank you. Seema?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, quick learner, wherever you are, it's absolutely important. I'd also say communication skill is another one that I find really, really important. We can be the person, sometimes we hear the harbinger of bad news or the one who raises a lot of defects. We're not there just to raise defects or just to find something and leave it there. It's about communication with your cross-functional team, your peers, stakeholders. How are you going to report what you're doing? So it's not just about spoken skills, it's also about written skills. How do we report what we are finding? How do we support the product managers? How do we see users being affected? All this comes down to communication.
That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely
Brian?
agree on that one as well. Anybody that's ever listened to me on the podcasts or spoken to me for more than 5 minutes will know that I will start talking about focused curiosity, critical thinking, systems thinking, and communication. And those are the key skills as far as I'm concerned. And if you have that curiosity, it will drive that continuous learning anyway. You will want to learn more. You will want to get involved. You will want to dig deeper. So I would say that those are the keys for me. And certainly going back to the communication skills, they are absolutely vital for moving it forwards. There's no point being a techie with your head down in the detail when you're a tester. You have to be able to communicate it. You have to be able to communicate the meaning of what you're finding and what the impact is.
I think there's a broader aspect to the communication, because in many ways you're involved every stage with every person in a project. So at one level, you are the glue that holds the project together, which sounds a little bit arrogant, but if you're talking to developers who are not talking to users, and you discover there's a difference in their opinion of what the project should do, what the system should do, you found a really major problem in the project, and that's a benefit to the project. So I see it as a very rounded set of skills, but communication is fundamental, absolutely fundamental.
Yeah. We're also working in working in agile, or remote working has become really common these days, and we're all spread around. We don't sit together and work the way we used to know who was sitting next to us or across us. So the more apart we are, I think it becomes more important. And we're not working just as a test team, developers working on their own anymore. We're cross-functional. We work together with different team members, different types of skill sets. And with DevOps and Agile and all these coming in, it's making it much more fluid. So I think, yeah, it becomes really critical.
That's interesting about remote working, because obviously that's been such a huge change to most people's jobs in technology over the last few years. Out of interest, Seema, how do you think that's affected sort of communication style? Because I mean, I guess previously, you know, let's say you're reporting a bug, your developers may be sitting sort of 2 desks away from you. Now, likely that isn't the case. That's surely affected quality engineers.
It has. So previously you can see what the person is next to you doing, or everyone's focusing on their work, or you have coffee conversations as well. But now you're dependent on Slack or Teams or some kind of messaging system. You might have to wait. You wait for a response, because we don't know what the other person is doing or focusing on or busy with on the other side. And time zones then make a difference too, with teams spread across, being global, being remote. We're working in different parts. So if we are on different time zones, then you just have to wait till that person becomes available. So it's not as fast and efficient. I think while working in person, you catch on some of the communication is not just about how you speak or write, it's also about the body language. You catch on certain things when you're in person, which you miss out on the screen, where just a little rectangle, seen only headshot, and that's it. You don't catch on what is going on with the other person on that day. How is that day been for this person, or is something else going on? We miss out on those things.
Just to chip in, I think it used to be the case before Zoom and Teams and all that kind of stuff, that if you sat people in the same room, you could say they've got 100% opportunity of communicating, because they literally can see each other in the same room and can speak. And you put them in the next room, and communication drops by, I don't know, 50% or some number. And then if you put them on a different floor, that's another 50% gone. And if you put them in another building, you might as well put them on the moon, you know. But now we've got Zoom, you think, oh, it's okay, because we can all talk to each other, you know, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever the product is. We can talk to each other anytime, but people have to schedule a meeting. And what we've lost is the informal catching up with people in the coffee room, or having lunch, you know, just to sit next to people at lunch. We lose the informal communication. That's completely gone, because people can actually drop out of Teams or Zoom or whatever and just not show up for meetings. You know, we lose those opportunities, those informal opportunities of just checking up on what other people are doing. You know, where are you today, and what's your problem today? We can't pick those kind of issues up in the same way anymore.
I'd agree entirely with that. Yeah, even though it's not a new thing having to work remotely. I mean, 17 years ago, I was working with both an American team and a team in Singapore, and an Indian team, and I was sat in Coventry at the time, so it was causing lots of interesting communication issues. But at the same time, the team I was working with in Coventry, I could go and sit inside of someone's desk and go, what's going on with this? How does that actually work? Lots of little chats, and as you say, at the coffee machine, grabbing your lunch, all those sort of things, where you pick up things that aren't necessarily going to be formally communicated, but are important. And the sort of things that aren't necessarily communicated to you, because people quite often don't think that testers should know about everything. We know we should know about everything. The rest of the program don't necessarily think in those terms. So it gives you the opportunity to pick up those sort of things that won't necessarily get circulated to you.
I think an attribute of testers is to be nosy and just try and figure out what's going on elsewhere in the project. If it's a project of some scale, I mean, you could say curiosity is a big thing, isn't it? And endlessly we know that curiosity is part of the tester's makeup. That's for sure.
Collect information. We love collecting information.
Yeah, nosy is definitely it. That's the whole reason why I got into testing in the first place, because I was nosy. I wanted to be involved in everything. So, perfect role.
But it's true. You never know what's going to cause a problem. So that's why you need to know almost everything you need to know. There is to know. So.
Yeah.
Bear in mind the next question is going to be about how do we assess these things. So I'm going to enjoy asking how you assess whether someone's nosy or not. I'll come back to that in a minute. But Brian, you mentioned about so the communication stuff's really interesting. You mentioned also about critical thinking. Can you give us an example of what you mean by a tester being thinking critically? Sorry.
Quite often, design decisions and architectural decisions are presented as being the truth. This is it. Where in actual fact, there's usually a whole load of assumptions behind it. Now, if you're thinking critically, you're going to be going, actually, what's behind this decision? Is it actually an absolute, or are there pros and cons to it? If there's pros and cons, what are those pros and cons? How are those going to affect the risk profile, for instance? How are those assumptions going to be qualified? And we need to think about those things as a tester as well, because further down the line, if some of those assumptions prove to be not true, that is going to impact what we're actually doing. It's going to impact the outcomes. So it's a case of digging in and going, is this actually true? What's behind this? What are the assumptions behind this? Or are we just jumping to conclusions, or do we actually have a logical thought process that gets us to that point? And root cause is another thing. Quite often you'll get a defect and it's like, well, obviously it's just a bug in the code, isn't it? Well, yeah, but what's the root cause behind that? Why did it happen? We need to be able to dig down into the root causes of these and deal with the root cause so it doesn't happen again. And similar bugs don't happen. So that critical thinking, that ability to pick things apart and think about them in a sense that is more detailed and I'm trying to think of a suitable word for it, that digs into it and into what the background is and doesn't just take things at face value. And I'm sure that Paul's going to have lots to say about that one. Sorry, Seema.
I said questioning the assumptions is what critical thinking is also about.
When people first hear this phrase critical thinking, if they've never read a book or seen a video or done a class or whatever, they think, oh, you've got to be hyper analytical like a rocket scientist. It's absolutely not that. It's a very human thing. And as Brian was saying, I would say pretty much the same thing, but in a slightly different way, in that when someone makes a statement or gives you a document, you say, well, who wrote it? And you say, well, have they got an agenda? Are they qualified to write this piece of work? do they know that the project just changed its focus and when this was written? Have they got a political agenda or a business agenda, and so on and so forth? So you, as Brian said, you look behind. You don't take things at face value. You always look behind at the sources and what could have gone wrong and why I might doubt this. And the same goes for what developers say and what technical architects say. It's all the same thing. They're coming at it from a perspective that might be the wrong perspective, or might be a perspective that's not appropriate for what users think of, or the senior business owners, or it's, you look further, you look deeper into human communication, I'd say, in those terms. It's a human skill. It's not a very highly technical skill. It's not like that at all, I don't think.
Yeah. This links in, to be honest, a little bit to the last QE Babble session, which was about delivering at speed. So it's about continuous integration and delivery, and I guess that's always a sort of constant for a quality engineer, that they know that actually behind them the project is always trying to deliver incredibly quickly. So when you're talking about critical thinking, it's often at a time when others potentially are looking to get that release out and make sure it happens, but you're making sure that you don't take for granted all the assumptions that are made on a project. You look at the root cause of things, you're nosy. So I imagine it must be a challenge, given the fact that often now companies are looking to release so regularly.
I'll chip in again if I think one of the things that sums it up for me is you can have all these wonderful things like critical thinking and perception and curiosity and so on and so forth, but at the end of the day, you've got to tell someone about it and say, look, this is a real issue. So there's this whole notion of bravery and courage and speaking truth to power, because the whole project might be focused in one direction and you're the only person saying, this is not going to work, guys, this is not going to work. And so there's a certain amount of I think those are the right words, courage and bravery, that you've got to, and bloody-mindedness, maybe. That's another aspect of it, and saying, there's a problem here that is going to bite us in the bum when we go live.
It's a need for resilience and, to actually put it across constructively to the team when such things happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so sort of style of communication, managing stakeholders. Yeah, okay. We've covered quite a few there. The hard thing, I'd imagine, is how you go about assessing or measuring some of these traits, because a written exam probably won't work. How do you go about making sure that you're talking to the right sort of characters when you're trying to bring new people into your team? Because there's a lot of different things that you've highlighted there, and is there any way that you can truly know whether someone ticks those boxes before they join you on a new project? Paul, can I start with you on
that? The short answer is not easily, I'm sure. I think you have to do it on a face-to-face basis and talk to people about their experience and ask them why they behave certain ways in their projects, in the projects they've described. So I'm talking about hiring now, obviously. So if someone says they worked in a certain project and it was really stressful, well, you want to know how they reacted. How did they deal with it? How did they really get stressed out themselves, and did they handle it well enough? Did they try and reduce the stress and so on? So these are very human questions that you've got to ask. I don't think you can say on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a critical thinker or a fantastic mover and shaker in high-speed projects or whatever. I think you've just got to have I hear their story, I think, is perhaps the shorthand for all this. So I'm a bit of a skeptic about measuring things numerically. I don't know if anyone's done that of you, but that'd be my take.
Seema?
I don't think we can measure these. No, not in terms of numbers or metrics, definitely. And I agree with what Paul was saying. about listening to their story. It could be either give a scenario and try and find out how would they deal with it, or what would their next steps be, or maybe their own experience. How did they come across this, and what did they do, or is there a lesson learned? Because sometimes we are in situations where we deal with it at the moment of time and then learn about it. Maybe next time we'll do it differently. So it comes across only as part of discussion in the interview, when you're trying to understand what is it that they have experienced, what is it that they've learned from it. We'll have a better picture of what's happened.
Out of interest, Seema, do you use any kind of personality test, psychometric test, when you hire people, or have you ever?
No, I've not. I've done psychometric tests as part of a team, but not during hiring. Not during hiring.
No.
As during hiring,
I've done some of them. But...
Sorry, Brad.
I wrote I got involved with a company that
I've done some of the psychometrics,
and I talked to them about doing a psychometric test for testers. This is about 15 years ago, a long time ago, and kind of got a lot of books on psychometric testing and cherry picked the things I thought this might be relevant to the way a tester thinks. And okay, I won't go into the detail. And actually used it quite successfully, insofar as they had a similar kind of approach as they did with the developers. But it was really just like an IQ test of sorts, wasn't it? It wasn't really. I don't know how useful it was, and I just looked at it for about a year and sort of moved on and left it behind. I don't have a feeling. Short of asking someone to actually, here's some software, go and play with it, tell us what's wrong with it. It's really hard. Or here's a scenario. There are scenario-based evaluations where you can put people in a situation, say, well, talk to me how you would deal with this situation with maybe a conflict between two people in the team, or someone who's not sharing their information and trying to get information out of their heads, or get them to write a document, which they hate doing, or short these scenario-based tests. It's really hard to figure a way of measuring these things. I mean, I don't know. I don't, you've done a lot more hiring than I have, Brian. I don't know how you got around this. It's a real problem.
Well, one of my obsessions is psychology. So I did quite a bit of digging into how good are psychometric tests. And the basic outcome on that is that they're not particularly useful for actually selecting individual people. They're better for ensuring that you've got a range of different styles of thinking and styles of behaviors within a team, but not necessarily for going, this is the right person for this job. So I'm not overly keen on psychometric testing in its own right, and it's also very much context sensitive, because the way that you would answer those questions in one context is going to be entirely different to another. We all have different aspects to our lives and behave differently in those different aspects. As far as how do you actually work out whether the person's a good fit, you sort of pick up clues. NLP is really good for this, not natural language processing, but neurolinguistic programming, where you look for the gaps. You look for where they're chunking up or where they're chunking down their answers, and if they're chunking up, dig a bit deeper. If they're real down in the detail, then ask them for the bigger picture and see if they can do that. And you pick up clues on the words that they're using, what sort of words they used to describe how they were thinking and they were behaving and what they did. And from those clues, you can get an idea whether they are actually curious, for one thing, whether it's like, and whether they were wondering about things, whether they got interested in something, and whether they dug into it. The other thing is if they ask questions. If during the interview you give them a scenario and then they come back with a whole load of questions about that scenario, then they're obviously thinking critically about the scenario. So that sort of feedback, it can be absolutely valuable in trying to assess people. But when it comes down to it, you don't really know until you get them on the ground and doing something and working with them.
It's very honest. That's actually, I'm just flashing up a question here that's come in, and there's been lots of really interesting stuff in the comments while we've been talking. And Brian, you've kind of answered this just there. How would you assess a candidate in an interview to determine if they are skilled in critical thinking? And you just mentioned about, you know, if they're asking questions, if they're asking good questions, would be one way.
I've seen with developers, I've got a little bit of experience of witnessing rather than taking part in a recruitment process for developers where they were literally not interviewed very much at all. They were given like a briefing and then said, right, you're going to spend an hour pairing with one of our developers in the team to take on a certain task. And it's not the manager who's interviewing who makes a decision. It's the team member who pairs with this candidate. And they give a feedback and say, look, this guy is hopeless. You can't even get any information out of him. He didn't want to lead the conversation, didn't want to follow the conversation, he wanted to be in control, or he didn't want any control at all, whatever. But they actually put them into a real situation, a task-oriented situation, a real scenario with a real human being. I've not seen that as an assessment approach for testers. I don't know if you've got any experience, you guys, but it seemed to me that would be an interesting thing to try. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't have some value, to be honest.
Yeah, I have two different ways where I was not the interviewer, but I was being interviewed at that time. So one was, like you said, Paul, a whiteboard. I was given a whiteboard and then a brief saying this is this and this is what we are building. I was shown the design document of images and pictures and flowcharts and said, this is what we're building. What do we need to test? What are you most concerned about? Where will the risks be? How are you going to test the whole system? And I just had to talk through it, not write down anything, just talk through what comes through my mind when I'm looking at those diagrams and architecture, and then whiteboard the whole solution as much as possible. And during that, there was constant, why do you think like this? And what assumptions are you making? So that discussion was going on in that 1 hour. The other one was a project where a project was given, but it wasn't fully detailed. It was very high level. So there was no way you could come to a solution. It wasn't there for solutionizing at all. So it was more trying to understand, what is this person going to come back with? Is this person going to ask questions? Are they going to make assumptions and then come up to a solution? Or are they just going to jump in and find a solution of whatever they can of the brief that was given and then see if it's worth it? And then the next round of interview, we were discussing about it. So there were two different ways that I've seen.
I think I've just remembered something. This goes back 30 years, I'm afraid. My first job in testing, after I was a developer, I'd written a test strategy. That's how I got the interview. But I was given a document to read and then given an assessment by a consultant of that document in terms of a test strategy. So I had to critique a test strategy, but also critique the report of a consultant who reviewed that test strategy. And but I was going to be a consultant, so that seemed to be a fitting thing to do. But we just need to find appropriate tasks for people to do that. If we can involve other people, but it's expensive, but if we can involve other people, you can see how they think perhaps a little bit better, how they communicate and how they interact with other people. These are all part of the makeup, aren't they? And having said all that, I think, isn't it true that when people sit down for an interview, the interviewer decides within about 30 seconds whether they're appropriate? Isn't that how it works?
Sometimes.
Well, I'm not saying it should work that way. Absolutely not. Some people make their mind up very quickly just by the way people look and how they open their mouth for the first time. The first words they say, like, consigns them to the the backlog or whatever. It's a very human thing. It's a very difficult thing for us to pinpoint. I think that's the challenge we've got.
Yeah, and that actually, to be honest, is probably similar to a CV as well. In that, if we're being honest, certain things get your attention quite quickly, good or bad. And as much as you want all assessments to be fair and objective, it's when you see something in there that you don't like, or you hear something you don't like, or that you do, then it leads you down a certain path. It can lead you down a certain path quite quickly. The same is probably to be said for looking at CVs, assessment, and interviews. I'm just going to flash this up because I think this is quite an interesting one. So this is, I think this is Brijesh who's watching. So thank you. I essentially evaluate the testers by asking them to test and then present their strategy and report. So it tells me a lot about their thinking process, storytelling, and confidence. Also, to test, I would assume that they would have questions, and that's something that the testers must have. So that's a sort of scenario-based question, isn't it? Asking them to put together a kind of strategy and report on a certain situation. Also, there's been quite a few people who've suggested different kind of tests that you could use. Someone here has mentioned the psychometric test used by Will Smith in Men in Black 1, which was more of a joke, but it did make me laugh. But on a more serious point, Sue Atkins, who's watching, said and this isn't what I'm aware of, the Belbin team working profile. I've not come across that one before.
Again, that tends to be personality types, so you can get the right mix of personality types within a team.
That's the theory, isn't it?
Yeah.
But to a certain extent, you tend to get that behavior that you will identify with whatever type that you think is most appropriate to you, whether it is you or not.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's. So it's really, really interesting what we've covered there. Let's try and move on to the next part then, because I think this will be a fairly sort of chunky part of the conversation as well. So the third question was, is the industry lacking any kind of universally recognized way of accrediting testers or certifying them? Is there currently a good pathway for people who work in testing? It's something that I've spoken to Paul about in particular quite a lot. But the testers that I talked to, over the last sort of 10, 15 years, so 15 years ago, then things like ISEB was seen as a sort of a recognized benchmark as to potentially where you've got your skills, what level you might have got your skills to, and quite a good percentage of people were using something like that. It seems to have waned in its sort of popularity over the years. There doesn't seem to be too much out there that's kind of replaced it or sort of it works alongside it. So we've just discussed that it is quite difficult to assess all of these different kind of personality traits and characteristics that make a good quality engineer. Brian, I'll come to you first. Do you think that the industry is lacking a way of recognizing what makes a good quality engineer?
I think it is. I've seen lots of conversations around how we should measure it and how we should certify it. ISTQB, for instance, has got a complete portfolio of certification you can do of all sorts and sizes and styles. But the majority of it still comes down to essentially a memory test. So it is, in effect, just testing what I think Paul referred to as the admin skills of a tester. So it's essentially the basics. It doesn't actually test how good a tester you are, just whether you can remember what the admin tasks are that you have to go through and what the terminology is. So I think that there's a place for that, because it means that we're using the same language, we can understand each other, the same terminology, and it's useful as a grounding for, you need these admin tasks in your briefcase. But I think there's something beyond that, and I don't think we have it. And I think it's something more practical, more along the lines of how you get certified as an engineer. So you have to prove what you have done in the past and have documented evidence of what you have achieved with it, as opposed to just being able to memorize a set of terms and be able to regurgitate it in an exam.
So just before I go on to Seamus, that's the same question, Brian. How do you think that would benefit the industry then?
Well, for a start, it would mean that you would actually have something that's evidence-based, that this is what you've done in the past. So, for instance, the CITP certification, which is a much broader one, because it's across the whole of the technology, the IT field, has a stronger degree of, I've actually done this job, I've done it on the ground, and I'm certified for doing it. And I think we need something in a similar direction for testers that is recognized. So we get recognized as being professionals, as being test professionals, but also that makes it easier for the rest of us to go, okay, so they're a certified tester. That's interesting. That sort of puts them on a higher standing than someone coming in from having done some UAT in the background once.
Okay. Thank you. Seema, your thoughts?
Certification does help. I've seen it work, and it's absolutely needed in manufacturing or healthcare industry, where it becomes really useful to have one, because we're talking the same language, like Brian said. It's also important to know the basics of it, although it might seem small, but I think the test methodologies, or how do you the testing techniques, some of these are really useful when you're starting off in your initial days of when you're starting off as a tester. It does lay a foundation for the tester to start off with. I think as you grow in your career, it doesn't add a lot of value, and it doesn't change or hasn't changed with technology and times. We do have some of the certification, like for agile testing or for automation, I think, but I don't think it completely is useful for our day-to-day how we work in the organization. It doesn't reflect that at all. So that's, but I've seen it being really useful when a team was very new. They were not from IT or testing background. They joined as testers in the team. This was their first experience, and it was really useful. Instead of saying press this button here, that there, and if you see an error, write it down, it was better to go through a certification, and they knew what we were talking about when you talk about test plans and writing test cases, or writing a report. And once that basic understanding was there, it became easier to then grow on top.
Okay, thank you. Paul, I'll come to you last. What are your views here?
Oh, this is last, right? Okay, sorry. I'd a lot to say. I'm sorry, but semi-randomly, the first thing is, I remember I was talking to my dad a long time ago about learning how to drive, and he said something which always stuck with me. He said, you do your lessons, you take your test, you get your license, and then you learn to drive. And in the same way, I think that's how certifications work, is you can do a class, you can learn some terminology, and you can learn some theory, you pass your test, and then you rock up for your job. And like, is a 3-day class enough to do the job we call quality engineering, testing, QA, whatever? Certainly not. So that's not a passport to success in the business. So two things. Why is that a problem? How does that happen? Well, one is that the problem with certification as a regime is, firstly, it doesn't test your ability to test. And as Brian said, it's more a memory test of the last 3 days class that I've just done, because they're almost all, if not all, multiple choice questionnaires. They don't ask you to do the job. They ask you to pick an answer from a list of supplied ones. That's not testing. You don't get the answer when you test software, do you? And say, oh, it's A, B, C, or D. The other thing is also kind of context specific, in that it shows you one way of dealing with the end-to-end test process. It doesn't tell you how to think and choose and invent your own process, which is what a lot of testers have to do day to day. So anyway, so that's certification. It's part of the story, but it's not the whole story by a long way. I think I've been talking about professionalism, which I think is what we're really fishing for. It's like, how do you identify a professional as opposed to an amateur or someone who's done a class and spent 6 months working in one small area? How do we differentiate people? Well, how do other engineers do it? And they tend to have professional institutions. They tend to have well-defined career pathways and so on. So as you all know, but maybe not the audience knows, I've been working on a thing called the Test Engineering Society, which to me is, you could call it the Quality Engineering Society, but I don't like the word quality. It's a brand, not a technical term to me. But anyway, the idea is to try and come up with a scheme, a regime, whereby you can identify people's capabilities and aptitudes and skills and so on in a way that has meaning. Not necessarily numeric meaning, numerically assessed, but and if you like, all the engineering institutions, of which there are 39, come under the umbrella of the Engineering Council in the UK. And they've defined a thing called UK Spec, which is a description of the areas of capabilities and skills that professional engineers should have. And without going into the detail, very quickly, one is technical knowledge. Yeah, you can put certification in there. Second one is experience of applying that knowledge, of actually solving problems, real world problems. Third one is leadership, either running teams or being a thought leader, take your pick. Fourth one is professional, personal communication skills. The fifth one is professional commitment to continuous learning and ethical behavior. So not much of that is actually technical. Most of it is about the human skills of making things happen in projects. So I'm hoping to make progress on that. And Seema and Brian have both said they like the idea and supporting it. So I'm not going to say anymore because but that's kind of where I see an opportunity to make progress in this area. That's how I would put it.
So how are people judged or marked under this scheme? How do they get to being recognised under this proposal?
Well, there are three categories. One is engineering technician, one is incorporated engineer, one is chartered engineer. Just like the other engineering disciplines, electrical, mechanical, civil, and the BCS obviously operate this scheme as well, but they do in a very generic way. Mm-hmm. At all three, I wouldn't call them levels. To me, they're not measures of seniority. They're more about placement. I want to be a techie. I'm happy being a techie. Engineering technician is where I'm at in my life. Now, you might say, well, I want to graduate towards incorporated engineer and then chartered engineer, but I don't think that's the way to look at it. A chartered engineer would be someone who's got 15 years experience, maybe running teams, program level experience, that kind of stuff. Incorporated engineer might be a team lead who's happy being a test manager running teams. And the engineering technician might be someone who's a lead tester in a technical way, maybe running the testing in an agile team. How do you get assessed? There's long and short of it is it's a paper exercise for the engineering technicians. So you look at a submission. It's not a CV. On the incorporated and engineering and chartered engineer levels, categories I should say, there's an interview involved as well. And that's where you get the opportunity to actually assess people's perception. You've got to hear their story, ask them about what they've done in their lives, and hear how they behave and whether they're genuine. That's the thing, the real trick. It's not like they've downloaded a CV and invented it and they're going to make progress that way. So in principle, it's done by peers. Now that will require coaching for people to get through that process. And so there's an opportunity for the society to help people, but also people to get that help. That's the kind of the angle I would push it.
And this is something that people will be doing, obviously alongside their jobs and the rest of their lives. They're doing it as a professional qualification to show people that they've reached a certain level of understanding or skill in their
qualification. It's not theory in that respect.
Okay.
It's actually called registration. So you're a registered professional engineer with the post-nominals, the letters after your name, CEng, IEng, or EngTech, EngTech. So that's the way I would look at it. So to achieve that, you've put a submission together, which you can share as a CV if you like, but it's probably much more comprehensive than a CV because it talks as much about personal and professional skills than just technical skills. And just say, I've done this, I've done that. You have to sort of provide more detail and explanation of how you did this and how you did that and why and wherefore and so on and so forth. So it's a broader assessment. Now, it's not perfect. I'll be the first to say that, but it's better than what we've got. That's the least you could say.
How do people get involved? How do people get involved, Paul? So there's a couple of people who've already asked that in the chat. So can you put a link to it in the comments when we're finished?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The long short of it, there's a website, testsociety.org, and there's a particular link that you can send feedback, which I'll pick up. And we're getting to the point where getting people engaged on making and doing useful stuff to make this thing happen. It's probably a 3 to 5 year project to actually get the society going and become licensed to operate this way. It's not given that other institutions have had 200 years, we're trying to do an awful lot in a very short time. Okay.
Yeah. But you're looking for others to sort of support, endorse the idea, get involved.
And absolutely get involved. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully there's some people who are watching along today who'd like to. There's quite a few people who've expressed an interest in what you've said already. There's a question here about it, which you've kind of touched on slightly, but I'll get you to answer. Is what you're proposing a test QA engineer specific version of the Chartered IT Professional Scheme currently offered by the BCS?
No. Well, I wouldn't put it that way. The BCS you can go through the BCS to achieve Chartered Engineer status, because it's the BCS is one of the 39 institutions regulated by the Engineering Council. However, the problem with the BCS is it's not focused on testing or QA or quality engineering. It's trying to cover everything. So CITP, I think, as Brian might have said, it's very broad. It's not focused on what we want to be focused on. You wouldn't hire I don't think you could hire a quality engineer on the basis of, well, a CITP. I would defer to Brian to answer that one. I couldn't possibly comment, I think is a phrase. But it's not quite the same. Okay.
Well, yeah, thank you for going through all of that, and yeah, do put the link in the comments when we finish, because I'm sure a lot of people would like to get involved and hear more about it. And it'd be interesting to see its journey over the next few months and years. Hopefully, you make a real success of it. I think it's a great idea, and so many of the people I talk to feel there is a need for it. So hats off to you for coming up with it. we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I just want to, if I can, touch on something that I think other people who are watching would probably be interested in. So we've spoken about how we assess some of those key traits of a quality engineer. Now, a lot of how we assess those things, we've kind of discussed in terms of how you might interview someone if you're actually talking with them. But a thing that I know that people are kind of struggling with at the moment, certainly, is that within the quality world, it's going through a bit of a difficult period. A lot of people are kind of looking for work, looking for the next opportunity, alongside lots of other candidates. How can they get these points across in a CV in an effective way to get to the point of having an interview? So how can you what do you do when you look at a CV to ascertain whether someone might have some of these key personality and character traits? Seema, if I could ask you here.
Yeah, I'd say on the CV, I think it's good to give evidence of not detailed evidence, but at least mention how you approach certain projects or what traits were required, instead of just saying high pressure environment. That would then make us curious to ask questions in the interview instead of just technical, I know all this language. And sometimes it's important to show how they grew by learning. It could be that they've not done something ever before and worked on a project previously that they had to learn something and show evidence of how they did that. So that's also useful to see. Yeah, and numbers would be also nice, instead of just saying, I know technologies, I know all this list of technologies.
Yeah, I think from speaking to candidates, it's difficult for them sometimes. They know they have to get the point across about what technical skills they have, because often if someone hasn't got the right technical skills, things might not go any further anyway. But actually, these personality and character traits are so important too. Brian, we've got sort of 30 seconds to a minute left. Do you want to just add anything there on how people can give themselves the best chance of showing some of these qualities?
I think that's the problem.
I think, as Seema said, don't just put a list of technical skills, put what you actually did. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the problem that Paul is addressing or trying to. But on your CV, don't just put a list of technical skills. Put how you approached it and what difference did you make? What was the impact of what you did? So it's got more of a story involved in it. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be like a full 3-part story, but just a little bit more of that. What did you do, as opposed to what skills have you got in your quiver of certifications?
Yeah.
Paul, any final thoughts?
The challenge we've got is that if someone's hiring 5 people in a team, they'll probably see 100 or 200 CVs. And who has the time to read everybody's individual story? And yet that's the only way you're going to understand how they tick. So this is part of the problem we've got, that the initial selection tends to be based on technical skills almost solely and industry specific experience. And it's just a shortcut to reduce the number of CVs, not a good mechanism for finding the best candidates, I would suggest. That's the problem we have,
Yeah, well, hopefully the Test Engineering Society is going to work to solve some of these problems. So thank you all for joining us. Someone here has asked the question, which is perfect timing. Olivia, will this event be available on YouTube? Sadly, I wasn't able to make it today. Yes, Olivia, it will be. All of the events that QE Babble run are on YouTube. So we've got, I think, 6 now in the library. Loads of interesting discussions in there for people to have a look at around quality engineering. This one's been great, talking about how to spot a quality engineer. Next month we're going to be talking about test coaching as a increased trend in the industry. So thanks again to Paul, Seema, and Brian, and we will see you again next month. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.